I want to talk about Nobody Wants to Die. It's a cyberpunk-looking, first-person detective thriller-looking thing. And I mainly want to use it as an example of something that is emblematic of various games that just drop out of nowhere. And I feel like we're getting that a lot more these days. Something like The First Descendant, something like Undisputed, the boxing game. I just feel like there are big, quote-unquote, AAA games that you just see in just out and about. No marketing, no run-up to them, and all of a sudden they're in the top 10.
Is the Annihilation music, or it's like the game just walks past you like,
yeah, just comes in through the doorway, leaning in for a bit. But I feel like these things end up when you go on the PlayStation search bar, you just randomly see something that's blown up. Like obviously Valorant is in the top 10 right now. That game's existed for a while, but not on consoles. Firewatch was back in the top 10 the other week, because of a TikTok trend.
Was it?
Oh yeah. Oh god, Firewatch dominated June because of a TikTok trend.
Man, what? A TikTok trend? Put Firewatch.
I was telling him who Kai Cenat was the other day.
I'm used to TikToks launching the music careers or getting a song queued, but I've never heard it do a game before.
Yeah.
That proves how out of touch I am these days.
Well, the thing is, it's happened twice now because, Firewatch happened a few weeks back where apparently there was some viral TikTok trend. I think it involved a Firewatch tower or something like that, and people thought it was based on the game, and it wasn't, but it still spiked the sales insanely. So that was one thing. Right now in the top 10, as we're recording this on PlayStation, is a game called Chained Climb Together, which is based on a PC mod type thing called Climb Together. Console version of that's coming along. But overall, something like Nobody Wants to Die feels like it has this level of production quality, this level of budget applied to it, as did First Descendant and Undisputed. And I just think it's weird where we're at, where it's just like fully formed, nigh on AAA titles can just drop. And that argument around whether marketing is actually a bad thing, where that idea of expectations not being met, or different versions of a game that are then broken at launch, or whatever it is, and the amount of different games that we've seen fail because of an expectation. Maybe various companies are relying on different methods to get out there, and something like this is just, it's better off not being showcased too much.
That viral quality is like so important. That Chained Together one, that literally has blown up because I think it's like £4.30 on Steam. And that thing, I only caught attention to that because Jack Frags did a video on it, and then I saw Video Game Donkey did a video on it, and I saw like everyone's now talking about this thing because it's just got that irreverent social kind of aspect to it where it's leading itself to hilarious generative moments where it's like, oh, I'm doing silly my mates. So I do think that it's interesting now that we are, obviously E3's dead, the Game Awards are still a thing, PlayStation has its state of plays, Xbox has its showcases, and obviously there's always going to be a place for those, but I am it is interesting. I don't think anything can quite replicate when a game gets into the YouTube and influencer sphere.
Yeah,
and that's why Helldivers 2 picked up as much as it did, because it was quite a sparse window anyway, but the fact that, key established shooter YouTubers got their hands on it and was like, this thing's really fun. That is clear, and it's been the case for a long time now that influencers are being courted to promote these things. But I do think if something is able to resonate in a big channel's audience, it massively boosts its chances of doing well.
100%. I mean, streamers were the TikTok trends of their time, weren't they? And they continue to be for the games, which is why I'm surprised when other platforms are able to push games up the charts, because it has for the past decade been streamers and YouTube content creators who focus on specific things. Like Ewan's absolutely right. Like I've been blindsided by so many games that I didn't know existed until they were picked up by a huge streamer or by a huge channel, and then their dedicated audience got on it. Like even something as big as Ubisoft's X-Defiant. Like when that was first announced, everyone was like, what the hell is this? It looks derivative. It looks rubbish. Then the YouTubers started playing it and reporting on it, and then suddenly you got that groundswell of, oh, there's no SBMM. Maybe this could be the COD killer. And then suddenly the narrative is that it's everything COD isn't, and everyone who's jaded with that franchise, come over here and this might be the game for you.
Also, the full version of that, the 1.0, whatever you want to call the non-beta version, didn't have anywhere near as much marketing or a push or whatever. It was just, hey, by the way, it's available. It's free to play. Click the button. Playing tonight. Sweet. They bypassed the whole thing.
I think, obviously, it's a great... It means that you don't have to rely on the standard structures and industries when it comes to marketing your game and trying to get it to an audience. I don't know where I fall on it, because I do think it's like a double-edged sword of chasing that virality can sometimes come at the detriment of the game, or just you might not hit with any of the influences you're trying to court. And I do think this year particularly, we've seen a lot of titles come and go that are games that you probably wouldn't see streamed or get much coverage on from the big YouTubers, and they've unfortunately kind of failed. It's not like they were ever perfect games and maybe deserve to sell 100 million copies, but I saw recently that the System Shock remake, which I really enjoyed, like hasn't done very well.
Same with Beyond Good and Evil's remaster.
Beyond Good and Evil, Alone in the Dark earlier this year, even Pacific Drive, which was getting great reviews. Like it seems like it's done all right, but it didn't catch on in the way that I thought it would be. So while I'm happy when a game does catch on and gets that sort of surge of sales and popularity, I also see all of the ones that didn't achieve it and also didn't get the marketing and just kind of came out and were there if you wanted it, and they have an audience of diehards, but is that enough in the current era where a game can sell millions of copies and the studio can still shut down anyway? I don't know.
I honestly, I wonder what it's like growing up as a gamer now. Like, we grew up in a completely different era, like across the 2000s or whatever, like different expectations. E3 was in full flow, different assumptions around trailers and different ways they were executed, etc. And there's just, if you're growing up now, seeing the amount of fires left, right, and center in regards to the AAA space, the live service space, or whatever it is, and just wondering where's the gameplay? Where's the stuff that's actually going to make me want to play something cool or whatever. And I'm not, this isn't graphics versus gameplay. That's not what I'm getting at. My point is, you see something like Roblox blow up so much, and there's a whole lot of stuff to talk about how weirdly predatory that game's systems and currency is and everything else. But it is by definition a showcase of gameplay mechanics and a showcase of ways to play together, etc. And these games, something like Palworld or Lethal Company, blew up so much because they're gameplay forward. They have nothing to live up to in regards to expectations, and they're just easy to play and they're fun enough.
I think it's timing and trust are the two big things now. I think 2024 has been a relatively sparse year, I think, in terms of like big franchise hitters. Okay. And the things that we've seen come out that have come from that kind of, that I'm going to call it, it's not grassroots, but certainly in those smaller indie spaces. I think there's the connotations of trust because so many different genre spaces at the minute feel so familiar. Yeah. And like, you know, like the battle passes of everything, you know, we come to expect that the big game of the year will involve you shooting things over and over. Whereas something like Lethal Company, where it's like, it's co-op, it's, you get those kind of spontaneous moments of storytelling with you and your friends. I think it comes down to the fact that we're getting those sparser areas where, you know, game development is not slowing down, but in terms of it's taking longer to get stuff made. I think that is benefiting things. And then if they have that unique gameplay hook, like you said, and the fact that it comes from someone that isn't a Ubisoft, that isn't an Activision, that isn't a Blizzard, that doesn't have the baggage of being a big company that needs to make, you know, huge profits or whatever, and do that by exploiting players, that puts them in a really good standing. And that's why you see, I think we're seeing kind of a little mini renaissance of AA and indie titles coming out here. Yeah.
But also, alongside this is the fact that, like, if you get away, you mentioned trust. Like, if you're talking about the idea of, okay, what am I looking at? And then I'm going to go play that exact thing. Yeah. It's way more straightforward and way less obtrusive. There's no wool being pulled over your eyes. Like, in regards to this climb together game, it's literally just a bunch of character models in an environment climbing stuff that's then service synced, and you do it as a group of people.
It's charmingly janky as well.
Yeah, it's got that whole thing.
We're trying to rediscover our roots, aren't we? We're trying to go back to the past. I think that there must be some collective exhaustion at some level in regards to the level of polish and budget and scope of gaming at the minute. And when something like Chain Together comes through, I think obviously it is because people have seen their favorite YouTubers play it and they've had a laugh and they've been funny with it. But I think it's also down to the fact like some people are after maybe more simplistic, easy to jump into experiences that they can share with people.
100%. For me, everything that you guys have said is definitely a part of it. I also think about that having the ability to share it with someone in terms of it being accessible. And I don't mean that in terms of, yes, there's definitely a part of it where it's like, oh, you can pick up and play this and just go and have a good time. But for me, it's the price point. I think we've 70 quid as the new standard bearer for AAA games. Like, I think that has done more harm than good, even for the companies who are relying on that extra revenue to boost their profits at the end of the year or whatever, because it's such a hard sell to recommend anything that's 70 quid to your friends, and especially at a time when people are more strapped for cash. Like, how many times have we jumped into the comments on our own videos when we've talked about a great game and people have, you know, rightly or wrongly, I think rightly, gone, well, how many hours am I going to get out of that? How good is it to justify that price point, where all the games we've talked about are, free to play, or they're a $5, or they're, even in the case of something like Helldivers, it's still a 40 quid experience.
Retro AAA pricing.
Retro, which feels like a deal now, but obviously it isn't. So being able to have that ability to not only see something that looks cool that you want to play, but also go to your community in Discord or your friends in real life and go, hey, should we try this out tonight? It's free to play, or in the case of that chain together, it's a $5. Let's have a nice weekend with it. You know what I mean? That sort of financial risk is so lower.
Oh yeah.
Palworld earlier on this year, having that like sort of lower price point, it helps so much in, I think, getting people psychologically okay with trying stuff out or taking a risk on something.
Palworld was one of those, is endemic of that whole, I know what I'm getting, it's Pokemon with guns. That's straightforward what it is, as opposed to spending the premium amount on the most recent Pokemon game, and it runs at 3 frames a second. Like 9 times out of 10, the higher the price point, the worse the performance is. For whatever reason, like especially on the third-party stuff, there's nearly always some bug, something that makes you wish you didn't buy in on day one. And like I said, if you're growing up as a gamer, you're growing up as a teen or whatever, you're playing all these different things, you're seeing all of this stuff happen, there's only so many times you're going to fall for it. And I think that the market will adjust to that. But it does bring it all back around to the idea of the use of video game marketing and the way that different studios have adapted to that stuff, and the viability of shadow drops and the viability of going viral on Twitter or whatever, social media or whatever it is. And just something like this, when I saw the trailer for Nobody Wants to Die, I was like, this is so accomplished. And it might be a straightforward walk and sim, there might be very little to it, but it looks very, like I said, it looks very accomplished. It looks like something that a major studio would put together.
Very Blade Runner-y.
Yeah, very Blade Runner, like it's a murder mystery thing set around someone being hung on a tree, the last tree in a cyberpunk future. It looks awesome, but the fact that it's just out in a week without anything else being talked about, because they are taking that risk of conversation and word of mouth, doing the legwork, where in previous generations, it would be get in touch with the magazines and have a write-up, have an exclusive story. Like Game Informer still do that, but hardly anybody cares about Game Informer numbers, at least on YouTube anyway. I think that's a whole other thing, is the game journalist side of it, the role of the games journalist, and how that stuff has changed over years anyway. The magazine side of things, the fact that someone like Game Trailers aren't breaking trailers anymore, and the fact that they'll give maybe a YouTuber, maybe a super fan access to a game and go hands-on with it, rather than a company. All of that stuff factors in to the point where you get something like this that is better taking a chance in the ether than going down the regimented systems as before, and maybe that's better overall.
Those have been the joys for me over the past year or two, I suppose. Those games that kind of just seem to come out of nowhere, that do at least something interesting or different, but also maybe shorter, but certainly lower in price. Like this year alone, picking up Crow Country because it was 15 quid, or going into the back catalogue of the Puppet Combo games because they're like $7.99 or even at maximum $15.99, of free-to-play games, or something on Game Pass like Lies of P last year, which I would have been cautious about if it was being sold for premium, but because I had Game Pass I could jump in because that was like by a developer I'd never heard of. I thought the idea of a Pinocchio based Souls game could go, pretty damn wrong. Yeah, I mean, like Pinocchio, but I jumped in. It had the time of my life with that game. Was one of my favorite games of last year. So for me now, I'm hesitant to even buy into the franchises that I love at 70 quid because it feels so. I just have these mental expectations with it now, and it feels like such a risk. So I am looking for those things where I can jump in, dabble with it, and not have that weight on me of this needs to justify the amount I've spent.
You know what's also really interesting about all of this, and again, like I don't think none of us are PC gamers, right? We're all still firmly in that console space. All of these titles, the most exciting kind of forefront viral games, are coming through on Steam. And I wonder how much of that, if you're, like you say, if you're growing up with video games right now and you're moving less away from those established, trusted franchise spaces, because you've seen how they nickel and dime you with like battle passes and pop-up adverts now in your games, which is just ridiculous. I do wonder if you're growing up now with gaming as a hobby, and you might have the Switch space, which is mildly less, predatory than like a FIFA or Call of Duty or whatever. I wonder how many of these kids now are like, well, I want to invest in a PC because I want to discover the next big thing, and it's always mostly coming through on PC, like Lethal Company. Like there was another one where you had to make a YouTube video the other year. Well, it came out this year. It was like a game where you go and do horror settings, and you got to get viral film footage.
I don't know. know.
I forgot what it's called. But these things are coming through on PC. Even Hell Let Loose, which I loved and I haven't played for like 6 months now, that came through on PC first. I think these new non-franchise games that are offering something that is then picked up on by like shooter YouTubers, like influential streamers, most of that is coming through on Steam. So I'm curious to see how that's going to influence behaviors going forward as well.
It's really interesting that I hadn't put those connections together until right now, but we've just talked so much about streamers and YouTube content creators, and I feel like the era of console players like us sitting down and do a podcast, like people still thankfully watch us and thank you so much and listen to us if you do. But like the millions of views that PC specific players get now is crazy. So I imagine that if I was, like you said, growing up and I was watching these people constantly stream on PC, constantly finding Steam games and cool low barrier to entry games, I'd probably wouldn't be here with consoles now because that was the norm when I was growing up. But is it the norm now? I don't know.
I think it's the norm in terms of how the average person plays video games, like console sale. I mean, I don't know. Like I think it still feels like consoles matter,
but specifically for finding new stuff.
Yes,
like like we don't. I think like there's less of a free like obviously anyone can submit their stuff to go on the PlayStation Store or the Xbox Marketplace or whatever. But there are still most of the time these games are coming out on PC exclusively on Steam, and then it takes a while for them to then be ported to consoles.
That's the case with that chain together thing. But something like Palworld launched, because that's the thing. Palworld launched in Xbox's early access. Like Xbox has an early access portion of the marketplace, which Sony doesn't really have. But that's kind of Xbox getting in on this and maybe reading the tea leaves and seeing that people just want to try these things as long as the label says early access. I mean, how many AAA games have we bought that still felt like early access? Like, that happens all the time. Something like Redfall or even Starfield, the amount that's been added to that or whatever it is. And again, if that happens too many times, you're just going to move away from it. You're not indebted to this in a way that we arguably are growing up with it, where you kind of want to stick around and see what happens. I think something like Nobody Wants to Die is just an example of how much the marketing has changed, like the approach to marketing has changed, and getting your game out there has changed as well.